Welcome to the ProfitLed podcast, where we discover proven growth strategies for bootstrapped entrepreneurs from the people who have done it before to help you accelerate your business. The ProfitLed podcast is brought to you by eWebinar, the leading automated webinar platform, which could save you from doing the same webinar over and over again. From sales demos to onboarding to training, eWebinar turns any video into an interactive webinar that you can set on a recurring schedule or make available on demand, which means you can do hundreds of webinars without ever needing to actually be there to host them live. This podcast is a forum for the unsung heroes of SaaS, the founders and others behind bootstrapped startups who are creative and resourceful enough to forge a pathway to success. Here is where they get to share everything they learned along the way, so you can benefit from their experience and find success in your own ventures too.
Welcome to ProfitLed, the podcast for bootstrap entrepreneurs looking to make it happen. My name is Melissa Kwan. I'm the co-founder and CEO of eWebinar and your host. Today's guest is a longtime friend of mine, someone I met while I was living in New York, growing my previous startup. We actually met because he sublet my room a couple times, because in cities like New York, you have to do that when you're traveling, given nobody can actually afford their rent. So I'm particularly excited to have you listen in on this conversation today, because this entrepreneur is one of the hardest working and pragmatic founders I've ever met. I don't think I know anyone else who's taken as many calculated risks as him in the past 4 years. I think a lot of times when we think about startups and founders taking the leap, we think about them as if they're jumping off a cliff with their eyes closed. And while that's true for many people, including myself, my guest today is one who would take that leap, but not before figuring out the many different ways he could potentially land first. And I mean that as a compliment, and perhaps that's why he's one of the very few people I know who successfully transitioned from a thriving development agency, a service business, to a product company, and now bringing in 7 figures in annual recurring revenue. Over the years, I've bantered with my guest over whether to bring in external capital or not, and what it means to raise venture capital. And through those conversations and much consideration, he decided that even though he could raise capital, that he would do it on his own terms. And it's with that decision and the hard work that came with it that I've come to amass tremendous respect for his journey. And to be honest, as a friend with a front row seat, there was a time when I wasn't sure if he was going to make it, but he did. And a little fun fact that not many people know, my first company was an agency, and I personally experienced the difficulty of transitioning to my second company, which was a SaaS business. And while I did it, it took me years of slogging, which also got me into an incredible amount of debt. So I have extra appreciation for entrepreneurs who have actually done this successfully. And speaking of bootstrap founders being unsung heroes of SaaS, my guest is truly one of my heroes. We're here today to dig into his journey and the steps he took to leverage the growth of his agency to fund his current startups, his trial and tribulations, and the things he's learned along the way. So if you're wondering how you can also transition your service business to a recurring revenue product, today's episode was made especially for you. And at the end of this episode, I hope you'll feel motivated, hopeful, and ready to execute. As you guys know from my previous episodes, ProfitLed is about me having a casual conversation with a friend at a bar. So while it's unrealistic for me to record this in a bar, I thought at the very least I could have a drink with my guest virtually. So here we are today with my very special guest, Tehsin Bhayani, the founder of AirMason. Hey, Tehsin, how's it going?
Pretty good. I'm excited to open this beer.
Well, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. As you know, I asked you to bring a drink to enjoy while we chat today. So show us what you got.
Okay, so I have a lager, and I've never had this one before, so I picked it out because it's actually the one thing that stood out, simpler times.
Okay, I like that, simpler times. All right, so I brought myself this ginger beer, and I love Moscow mules, but it's a little bit too early for vodka, so I'm going to have this just by itself today. So it's time for some ASMR magic. So let me first put some ice in my glass. All right, I'm going to open my drink now, so you can too. Just do it in front of your mic. Listen to this. That was my ASMR joke.
Yes.
All right. Well, you can join us at home if you'd like. Well, cheers.
Cheers.
Refreshing. How's yours?
It's pretty good. By the way, I should say this. I never drink beer, but
Oh,
since we talked about beer, I'm like, well, it's probably too early to drink whiskey or scotch. So I'm like, all right, let's find a beer. Let's find a beer I'm gonna like, you know? And so I'm like, yeah, this looks good. Picture looks good.
awesome. Well, eventually this will turn into like a drink reviews podcast. So Tehsin, all right, tell us a bit about yourself and what you're doing now.
Yeah. So the way I introduce myself is like I say, I have two tech companies. One's the digital agency that I've had for like 8 or 9 years now, where we design and build products for other startups. That's called Serind Labs. And then the second one is AirMason. So AirMason is an HR SaaS company startup, and we basically sell to large enterprises. So it's not meant for SMBs, but if you're a really large enterprise and you want to build an employee handbook, there's a lot of challenges in it. And it's a very niche market where we have basically the best solution in the market for that. So that's what AirMason does.
Beautiful employee handbooks.
Yes.
Moving off paper into fully immersive experience on the browser. Yeah. So how many years were you running Serind until you started dabbling in your own products? And were there other products before AirMason?
Yeah, I started dabbling right away. In fact, the agency was originally meant to be like a consulting gig. And like when I said we back then, it was just like me and a contractor working on a consulting gig. And so I was always starting products on the side. But then as Serind got kind of successful over time, I'm like, well, this is it. Like, this is the main business now. And sort of all the, side projects kind of went to the waistline, or they definitely, all of them failed. Yeah. All the previous ones failed. Yeah.
So how did AirMason come to be? Like, how did you come across it?
So I used to work at a co-working space, or I still do. We still have technically desks there. It's a co-working space in Toronto called Project Spaces. And we had all these like founders that worked there. And what made this place interesting is that it had the cheapest desk space. So you would find the most frugal entrepreneurs all in one spot because they figured out which was the cheapest desk space in Toronto. So anyway, we'd be there and we'd do like little hackathons over the weekend and come up with ideas that sounded kooky for its time and try to build it out. And one of the projects was AirMason that was built by Dawson, another founder, a buddy of mine. And then he just didn't want anything to do with it. So I bought it from him for like $8,000, like paying $1,000 each month, because it really didn't have like clients at the time. It was more like a nice kick-ass project. And people were like doing like $25 subscriptions. And so, yeah, I ended up buying that for $8,000, paid monthly, and then forgot about the project. Yeah, completely forgot about the project. Yeah.
But was it already revenue generating when you bought it? Like, how did like $8,000 come to be? Like, who set that price?
Yeah. It was just like, I'm like, yeah, how much do you want for it? I'm like, $8,000. I think I said like, I'll pay you like 12,000. It's like, no, it's not worth that. It's like, pay me 8,000. And then I'm like, okay, cool, I'll pay you 8,000. So it was like a lunchtime conversation because the customers, I guess it had like maybe like 10 customers, but they were all paying like $25 a month. So it wasn't like, maybe they were paying $25 a year. I don't know, but it was like something like very terrible.
Like super early. Like where did he go then? Like, why didn't he want to run that?
So we were all like just coming up with products. Like we took pride in calling ourselves like, we're the creators, we're the builders. So we ended up like creating tons and tons of products. And he created one called LogoJoy, and LogoJoy turned into Looka now, and they're doing amazingly well as well. Like they're kicking ass. And so that growth was so sudden for him that he's just like, I'm not going to worry about any of these other projects. I got to get this out of my head.
Yeah. I mean, having gone through building 3 startups myself, like being on my 3rd, you just have to put years into R&D before launching a product. And sometimes after you launch it, you have to iterate before someone even will pay for it. Like I would call that like your MVP. Like I define MVP as the minimal viable product somebody pays for, not like this napkin thing, right? So if you're starting with a revenue generating MVP, even if it's 10 people, you've just shaved years potentially off your startup. And and that means years of paying other people and not paying yourself. So I think it's a good reminder when starting a company that you don't have to start from scratch.
There's different types of founders, and like you're one of the few people that understand that, right? Like that minimum viable product is not what the lean startup guy said. Like, it's not,
Yeah.
no, don't follow that unless you've got like lots of daddy's money. Build out, make sure that viable product. And I think we've had that conversation once. Like, I remember like walking down Williamsburg and we talked about exactly this, which is like a minimum viable product has to be viable in the sense that customers are paying for it. And I think for me, for the longest time, I was in that lean startup camp, and I'm like, no, never charge, never look for customers. Build that experiment and build it useful, and then figure out how to hire salespeople to do that sales part later. And that was such a wrong way of thinking about it. But you're rare in that you understand that early on, I think. Yeah.
I think that's a sentiment that I have learned and earned over the years, because when you're bootstrapped, you actually don't have the luxury of people not paying you.
Yeah.
You have to be frugal. And part of being frugal is figuring out where the money's going to come from. So, I mean, now there are marketplaces like MicroAcquire that allow you to do exactly that.
Yeah.
So at the time, what was your thought process when you bought AirMason? Were you thinking like, okay, this is the thing? Did you want to move off your agency business? Like, where was your head at the time?
Yeah. So Serind was bringing in a lot of cash flow. So we had a lot of cash flow coming in. And at that point, I'd figured out, so I think right before that, what would happen with Serind, and it was like this terrible deja vu that kept happening every few years, we would have expansive growth. We would have all these clients coming to us, and it was all referrals, right? So we didn't even go out and do marketing or sales or anything. Inbound referrals kept compounding. And then so we hired a bunch of people. And then the projects could have completed. And then we would have a 3 or 4 month gap where we didn't have enough customers, and we would fall back again, and so we would go through these highs and lows.
The agency business.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm like, this is not a good business model. This doesn't make any sense. I can't run out of all my profits just because, we had a 2-month downturn, but it's agencies trying to feed a beast that's ever growing, and it's never going to be enough. So I knew that I wanted to start a project, and there was always the idea that we were going to build a product and we're going to transition out to a product side business. The mistake that I was making back then when I had AirMason along with 5 other ideas is I'm like, we are so smart. We're going to build 5 revenue generating businesses all at once because we've got so much manpower and we've got so many smart people at the agency. We do this over and over again for clients. Why can't we do it for ourselves? So that was the thought process in my head.
Yeah. Okay. So that was going to be one of your channels.
Yeah.
Because that was your superpower, is building revenue channels, even though all the other projects failed before that.
Exactly.
But I mean, it's so important as an entrepreneur to be optimistic. And I always say the line between delusion and confidence is so fine, but you still have to be optimistic because sometimes that's just what it takes, right? So during your time at Serind, you've worked with hundreds of founders, me being one of them. How were you able to leverage that experience and what you've seen other founders do to evaluate the AirMason opportunity?
I believe that even if I built a successful startup, like a product side startup 8-9 years ago when I really wanted to, I would have most likely failed because I really believe I was too dumb enough to know all the different ways of navigating it, and I wouldn't have been able to navigate it. What saved me is these hundreds of founders, like you said, one of them, and I got to take, front side seat next to each of you, right? And I'm like, oh, that's how you do that. Okay, so attention to detail. I can see how you were I think one of the 4 or 5 founders that stood out because everyone was so detail oriented, where it was so annoying for the agency, for the devs that were working on it, right? And then I'm like, yeah, but they all have it in common. So that works.
Yeah.
So every single successful person is this annoyingly particular about the details, where they think through every little element of that product. You don't take no for an answer. You dig through where that detail flows in and how to make sure that it fits within the user experience. how to make sure it works for the customer. And so it was just like one of those things that, so then I'm like, oh, okay, detail matters, to that level where I knew detail matters, but I didn't know that it mattered to that extent. And then there's all these other things like, selling initially matters, making sure that your clients purchase even your broken ass product MVP first, because it has to be useful to them. That matters. So all of that helped me in sort of running AirMason. The other one was almost everyone. So one of the things that I learned that I tried to emulate was don't do all of the work yourself. Whereas like Serind, I was the bottleneck in everything. So I would want to be the decision maker in everything and do every little part myself. Whereas with AirMason, what I learned is, so I'm completely hands-off AirMason. I don't even call myself the CEO because I don't believe I deserve that title there. My idea there was to build out and only build it in terms of like processes. Who do we need to hire? What kind of person are they going to be? And then how do I get the out of their way so that we let them build? And the only time I would intervene is that, and I can see something going wrong, and I'm like, ooh, that's a place where I can improve. So it was very like bird's eye view instead of being a soldier on the ground, taking a general's perspective on it.
I mean, usually that is the definition of a CEO, is delegation and finding the best people for the job. So you basically just took the soldier part of it. So I do think you're deserving of that title. Give yourself more credit. But also, like, I think like as you're talking about detail, like I'm kind of reliving that moment as well. Like, I think a lot of people think being detail oriented, especially in the beginning, like going from 0 to 1, it takes a lot of time, so I'm not going to do it. Or too much effort, too much money, or whatever it is, right? My personal position on that is I need to shorten the time to revenue.
Yeah.
So by spending more time up front, I'm actually getting to revenue faster. So it's not slower. Like the team might see it as slower, but I see the clarity because I'm the one that's selling it. I know that if I put something in front of someone, what they're going to buy and what they're not going to buy, because I've been selling stuff for over 10 years. And I've also been purchasers of B2B software every day, right? Like we use things every day. So it's almost like, okay, what I pay for, and you can't be perfect in everything, but I think the essential features that your customers are going to need, and then the 110 times feature that they're going to switch for.
True.
Those are the things that you have to get perfect. I don't know if you remember, but that like when we launched eWebinar, the one feature we gave up was Stripe because we built it. Yeah. But while it was like, okay, well, taking money is important. It's like, actually taking money is not that important. Signing up and taking the credit card's important, but we are actually giving everybody 2 months free trial as a first customer. So we actually have 60 more days to do the Stripe integration. So that was the thing we chose to give up. So I think about detail as like also speed to revenue, not delaying the speed to revenue. So how did you realize that AirMason was an opportunity worth pursuing? Like, were there indications? Like, did you work on it for years? What was that process like?
So when we first bought it, we sort of tried to work on it over that first month. And then, to be very blunt, my CTO at the time is just like, oh, this is such a boring ass product. Like, this. And then like, because we had all these other like 4 or 5 other projects to choose from, nobody in the team worked on it. And we had this thing called like Friday, do this Google thing where you get to work on any one of these 5 ideas on your Friday time, like completely waste time. So we thought that that was the path where we could get from agency to product, and nobody worked on it, right? Nobody worked on the important parts of the product. And so then we forgot about it. And then one day, like maybe like a year and a half, 2 years later, I got a call, and I would just start getting like a lot of calls over those 2 weeks. And I'm like, frustrated calls from people like, they're like, well, this is like really important to our business, and like, you guys can't be down, and like, this is important. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, what product are you talking about? And then I realized my phone number was on the AirMason website. And because we hadn't turned off the checkout flow process, people had bought it. We didn't have a functioning email, right? So people had just bought it and they were like playing around with it. And it had become such an integral part of this one company's culture and onboarding process. And I want to say she was in Texas. Like, it was one of those things where like, we would tell founders, they're like, how do we know when our product finds product market fit? And I'm like, your customers will give you proactive testimonials. They will scream at you for something really small because for them it means a lot because it's their companies run on it, or they find it really, useful if it's a, consumer product. And you will hear from them, like you'll see it in their eyes that no, this product is important to me. And so that's what I believe is product market fit. When someone like, screams at you or like just praises you so much, they're like, not because you decided to send them a request for review, but someone reaching out to you and telling you, you changed their lives. So with AirMason, we got all of that stuff happening in that 1 month. And I'm like,
yeah,
okay, I gotta pay the hosting bill for wherever this is hosted. And then I gotta turn on our emails and take a look and see what's happening. And then that's when my dumb brain went off and I'm like, okay, well, clearly there's something here. Let's put together a proper team and let's do this properly now.
But that was like 1.5 years, 2 years into like just letting it sit, right? So what happened? Like, how did people just start coming before you knew it? And how many people was on the platform, or how many companies were on the platform when that light bulb went off?
Yeah, so it wasn't that many, but it was like maybe like 3 or 4 customers when I'm talking about like these calls coming in. But those 3 or 4 customers that found us, so you had to go through hoops back then to sign up to our products, and they went through those hoops. And I think they went through those hoops because there was nothing good else in the market, because all the incumbents, like whether it's ADP, so ADP has a handbook solution, so does Bamboo, every single sort of like large HRIS product, which is like an HR sort of system, they have handbooks as part of their solution offering. They just suck, right? So like, it was like this product, it scratched an itch for these companies.
Yeah, I mean, to give people, I guess, a little bit more context, can you maybe expand a little bit on what AirMason is? Because I just want them to have an idea of like how core this is to a company.
Yeah, no, fair. So now let's say, you have a company and you're scaling up people and you're hiring people and you want to create like a set of policies and a culture handbook to tell people, hey, this is who we are, this is our values, this is what our values are. This is why we exist. This is our mission or our first principles that we'd like to derive all our solutions out of. And if you're like a, 10 to 20% company, you're going to be like, all right, yeah, I'm just going to create this in Google Doc, Word Doc, like upload it, PDF it, get people to sign it, talk to the legal team, get the policies in there. Once you cross over like 100 employees, 200 employees, now you're in like multiple states, you've got multiple different policies. You got what sales is expected to do in Atlanta is different from what like the tech team is allowed to do in California. So there's different things and different people have to collaborate on that handbook. It needs to go through approval processes. And you want a new employee who starts off, as soon as they get hired, you want that handbook to be delivered to them. You want to be able to track that. So AirMason does all of those things basically. And makes it really easy for that handbook to look good. That was the core product. I mean, today, people use it for all kinds of documents. So we've got companies like Rackspace and Elasticsearch and Mattel, and like they use this for all kinds of documents, being able to search through all of your documents, being able to make sure that only the right people have access to the right documents. So that's sort of what it's evolved into. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. I want to just have a shameless plug here. It is possible to integrate eWebinar into AirMason.
Yes.
So if you want to have an onboarding webinar about benefits, what you can get, blah, 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 whatever it might be, access within AirMason, that is also possible.
So it's such a natural fit, right? Because it's not yet a plug. It's actually a very like complementary product because the handbooks are there, but let's be clear, like this is text. We now like encourage clients to put their videos in there and we can like search through the videos and all that good stuff. But nobody's reading text really. Like people are trying to get people to read text. And what's great about eWebinar is that then it's a video. People can do it at their own time. They can do it on their mobile. They can like, it's got that sort of interaction thing off to the sides where you can actually interact with it. So I think it's a no-brainer. I wish more people used eWebinar with the AirMason handbooks because my attention span's gone down and I don't read as much as I used to. And videos make a lot.
Well, nobody does. Yeah. Nobody does. I mean, just the searchability of it, right? Like I think anyone that's joined a new company is like, okay, here's your handbook. But where do I look? Is it searchable? It's, like usually it's like a PDF, right? Like,
Yes,
and then now you're working in version control, languages, updates. Everyone knows they have benefits, but what are those benefits? Where do I find them? What if I have a question? Who do I ask? So when you first started exploring AirMason, I know you were like on the fence about it because it just wasn't something you were super passionate about. And I remember having this conversation exactly. I was like in Vancouver at the time. And it makes sense because it wasn't your idea to begin with. So I remember telling you like, hey, if you're going to commit to this thing, you have to be in love with it. Otherwise, it's going to be really hard on top of just being hard growing a startup. So why did you pursue it anyway?
Yeah. I wasn't interested in going to any investors to raise money. It's hard to go to someone with a straight face and be like, okay, so like, I don't think I'm like really passionate about HR, but like, can I still get $1 million for this company and like grow it because I think other people find it useful? So it was such a dumb proposition to go down that way. So I kept like sort of thinking through it and let it like, I dabbled with it, but I wasn't really pushing it until I sort of started understanding how the problems that we faced at Serind over and over again around culture, around how employees will act in your organization, all comes down to the definitions of your employee handbook. Like, if you haven't taken the time to figure out what your mission is, what your values really are, and none of those fluff value props like, let's be trustworthy, what sets you apart? What do you want your team to have in mind as their first principles when they talk to each other, when they problem solve, when there is a tough situation with a client? How will they interact? If you haven't defined that in your employee handbook, you're going to leave it to luck. And if you have it created, if you've taken the time to create it, and what I found is when we had all these clients that were using AirMason, there's some like incredible companies there, like best of breed companies that are using AirMason. And I'm like, okay, you guys are doing well because you chose to define this. You turned culture into a product.
Yeah,
you turned
that's
culture
interesting.
into a product, right? And you built it out and you defined what was important. And then you made sure that there was handrails for new people coming on so that they could come on to that culture and embrace it and then add to it. And it had network effects. It was a beautiful product. And then I'm like, okay. I love AirMason. If that's what it is, I love AirMason. I think
that's cool.
I wish we had that at Serind. So that's where I think and I'm so glad I waited for that genuine love to kick in for what was there, because I'm like, okay, I get it now. And then even with that, I still wanted to treat it as like, I didn't want to get married to it. I wanted to treat it like a business. I wasn't buying all the bullshit around like, this needs to be your life and you need to give up everything else for it. I just simply wasn't buying it because whenever I read those, there were blogs written by VCs.
Yeah, of course. I am kind of on a rampage to say, specifically in my posts and all those things, like there isn't a playbook for building a business. Anyone that tells you there is, either they're a VC or they're just lying. I see all this like, oh, if your company's growing this percent, then it's has product market fit. If it's growing this, then it's doing well. It's like, well, there are so many factors actually that go into growing a business, and the human factor actually being a really big one. Yeah. So does that mean that if my company is not growing at X percent, then it's not as good as yours, or, vice versa? Yeah. So I'm a huge fan of like, write your own playbook, right? Like all those things are there and experiences there as guidelines, but you do not have to follow those things. So it's cool to also just hear you talk through the thought process of like, okay, here's how I discovered a love for it, because my intro was all about you being a pragmatic founder. And that's like, you've just really demonstrated that. So I love how you like walked right into it.
Okay, good.
What was your go-to market strategy for AirMason? Like once you're like, okay, this is it. Like then what happened? Hey, I'd like to take a second here to talk about my own company, eWebinar, and our mission to rescue people from what I call webinar hell, to give them back their time and save them literally hundreds of hours every month through webinar automation. If your sales team is tired of doing the same demo over and over for unqualified leads, or worse, prospects who don't even show up, an on-demand demo powered by eWebinar can help them get their time back so they can close more deals. If you're doing customer onboarding and training on repeat, eWebinar can help you automate those so you never have to do them live again. Customer success teams are using eWebinar to run hundreds of sessions every single month without a live host. Why don't you give our product a try and see for yourself? Visit ewebinar.com to join our own on-demand demo or to sign up for a free trial. All right, now that I've gotten that on my system, let's get back to the episode.
I knew because we were bootstrapped, we're very limited to what our distribution channels could be. It wasn't going to be paid ads, and it wasn't going to be, so in order to be a partner, in the way the HR tech industry is structured is to build those partnerships, you had to pay like, $30,000, $40,000 to get onto the marketplaces to sell the product. And I'm like, yeah, I don't have $30,000, $45,000. So we're not going to do that. And so the distribution channel was always like looking for earned media. And what it came down to for us was SEO. We were doing SEO for clients on Serind side, and we could take any site and bring it to the first page of Google on the Serind side. And we're like, let's practice what we preach. Like, can we just do what we tell our clients to do, and like that'll work for us? And it did. And so if you search for employee handbooks, AirMason shows up number one. It was like an inbound lead campaign, and clients were just finding us on Google. They would come to the website. A long-winded way of saying like that was a distribution channel initially.
Did you ever hire like an external sales guy who gets paid strictly on commission? Because I also remember us having a conversation about that.
Yeah, I didn't. I don't know if we had this conversation before or after, but I did end up hiring one that it didn't work out. And then I hired two more and that didn't work out either.
Yeah. I mean, that's hard, man. It's hard for any company.
Yeah. And what I realized is that it's only when marketing holds hands, even if they don't want to hold hands with sales, they gotta hold hands, they gotta sing Kumbaya together, and then the magic happens.
Yeah, I mean, marketing is the new sales. I've been in sales for almost 20 years. My first job was sales all the way to now. And I am truly convinced that the new sales is community driven. It's social validation. It's marketing. It's one-to-many. Like, people do not want to talk to a salesperson. I think there's a place for that, like massive, like enterprise products, SAP, like ERP, like, like really complex sales cycles. Like of course, like there's a place for that, but more and more people want to do their own research. When we are consumers, right? Like we want to buy TV. What do? Ask our friends. Like search on review sites. We don't immediately go and talk to a salesperson, and B2B is the same. So is that how you got your first 100 customers? Would you say is like inbound SEO?
Yeah, it was inbound SEO. It was also a lot of like maybe about 20-30% of it, which is a pretty high number. I later found out was customer referrals, because once that's the beauty of like organic sales, when customers have to like jump through hoops, like they found you, they didn't click on the paid ads, so they weren't dumb enough to click on the paid ads. They did their own research, but you were on the first page. They clicked on you, they saw your examples, they did the demo. And so this is where like I have to take very little credit for it. It was our team. It was the AirMason team that really delivered, right? Like the customer success, one specific customer success person that I hired. And when she came in and the way she took care of every single customer, those customers then, anytime they were around other HR people, they'd be like, AirMason, you got to use AirMason. That was our first initial 100 customers.
And I know your customers progressively also got bigger over time. And you guys now have what I would call like a marquee list of customers, like companies like Softbank, Soho House, P&G. Like, how did you, or maybe even when did you start leveling up and start closing these kinds of deals?
Yeah. So I'd read, I like to shit on VCs, but I mean, there's so many VCs that I absolutely love and like fucking give anything to work with them. Like, so like someone like Paul Graham or Fred Wilson, and I'm going to not remember who wrote this, but they talked about how to go upstream and how you had to start here and then go upstream. And I remember thinking, and I'm like, I don't think we are meant to be an SMB product, because our churn, we were in that camp. I'm like, yeah, let's do SMBs first, and then we'll figure out how to sell to enterprise later, because we don't have all the certifications, all that stuff. But our SMB churn was so high, and we thought there was something wrong with our product. And then the light bulb hit. I'm like, wait, no. It's not that there's something wrong with our product. our product is not right. They are not our clients. Get rid of all the SMBs that want to sign up with us. Tell them no. Jack up all the prices for SMBs so that they're not even wasting your time. And then what's left is the enterprise client. So we said no to all the SMBs, and then we're like, and then enterprise. And then we came out very clean in front of those enterprise clients, and we said, look, these are the certifications we have. This is what we don't have. This is what we're gearing towards. We're like a very engineering focused team. We have already like great security in place. We would love to sign up with you. And there were longer sales cycles. So there was like 2-month sales cycles. But like because our SEO was so good, enterprise clients were in there. It's just that we were never paying attention to them because nobody wanted to spend 2 to 3 months with an enterprise client. And we said, no, let's remove all the distractions. If we know our product is good for them, we know that there's nothing else in the market for them, then screw the rules. Let's try to sell to them. And it worked.
And what was that minimum company size? And at that point, like, did you still not have salespeople, or did you have like more account managers to like warm up those leads?
We had one salesperson at the time. He's now our head of sales. And the lead came in. And funny enough, so he had come in and his first thing was a demo with this client, and we handheld him through the process. And this was like a client in like 120 countries with 170,000 employees. And so it was right off the bat, it was just like, and they took a long time. It took like 4 or 5 months to close. But it was just kind of like going through that and being like, look, we're a startup and we're good at this. Yeah. And you can see our software is better than what's out there. And it usually is if you're a startup than the incumbents out there. And doing whatever it takes to make sure that it fits within their process and making it as easy and as frictionless. Because the one thing we realized with enterprise is that because there were so many stakeholders, every little friction mattered. So removing friction from the buying process.
Yeah. So did you set a minimum size of the company, or did you just have a minimum price such that it turned away people that were SMBs?
Oh, yeah. We had a minimum price. We kept on moving up the minimum price. So,
sometimes that works. Yeah. And if someone wants to pay for it, then they're paying for it. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a site that cloned AirMason. Yeah. They're selling pretty much almost the same product. And what was interesting is like we would refer all the SMBs to them. We're like, yep, we know you're going to cancel in like 3 months.
Yeah. So let's go back to the agency and balancing two things, right? So how were you able to make the transition while managing clients on the agency side, because that was funding the AirMason side, right? So can you talk us through the progression of balancing revenue and costs on both sides, kind of from the beginning and how that evolved?
Yes, because Serind had a lot of cash flow, but was very minimally profitable. So there would be like some months we would have profit, some months we would not have profit. And more often than not, we didn't have profit. We just had a lot of cash flow. But by the time everything settled down, we're like, shit, this is all we made for that project. And so AirMason had to work. It was almost like playing a turn-based strategy game. I don't know if anyone's played that, but it's like you make a move and then you wait for 3 months to see what happens, because you can't roll any more dices until then, because that's all you were able to do. You were just able to make one hire, and that hire was the sales guy, but he doesn't have a marketing person yet. So will it succeed? I don't know. But you can only hire another marketing person in like 3 months' time. So the way it worked is had to be like very forward thinking, very small bite-sized experiments. And then we would see if we wrote a blog, and we didn't even have money to so we're like, okay, can we make a nice blog article that's going to be useful? Let's push it out. And then we'll find out if it works or not. So like small incremental progresses. It was okay to pause the communication. And there's like 3 or 4 of us at AirMason at the time. And this was like drilled down into everyone in the company. You're like, it's okay to move slow. It's okay to not be able to do something, even though it's very important. There's going to be 100 problems that we have in the company. The one thing that's going to fix all of those problems? Sales. Right. So it'll help fix it. So at one point we sold a product. We sold AirMason based on screenshots of the admin interface. So we collected pre-orders, and somewhere along the lines of like $120,000 worth of pre-orders for a part of the software that did not exist. because we're like, oh, let's go do it. Let's go do that hard thing of selling before this exists.
So it was just like small incremental improvements as you had bits of profit, you would put it towards this project. But you had already made that decision at that point that this was the project that you were going to work on, not I'm going to build 5 revenue streams when you first started.
Oh God. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that was important. So like I remember like reading somewhere, I think it was like this Warren Buffett or Charlie Munger thing and they said something like, Buffett had this pilot and he asked the pilot, what are the top 10 things that you want to achieve this year? And the guy, I'm going to completely butcher this story, so I apologize if it's someone else that did it. But the pilot came up with 10 things on a piece of paper that this is all the things that you wanted to execute that year. And then Warren Buffett said, okay, like cross out like 7 or 9 of those. And then what's that one thing? Go do that. Right. And I'm like, yeah, that makes so much sense. And so then I said no to all the other 4 things that were all exciting opportunities. And I said, I'm just going to do this. So anytime a founder, client, and someone said, yo, come in on equity. And I'm like, yeah, I know you're going to be successful. I can see you being successful. I'm like, but I'm not going to do it because I have to focus here.
So tell us about your team. So how did you balance their time and how did that change as the business was progressing? Like, was it the same team? Was it a different team? Like, how did you do it?
Okay. Yeah. So I'll say this in the perspective of an agency owner because I feel like I know so many people that have service-based or like they're either freelancers that work with contractors or agency side businesses. And I know how that business model is. So I'm hoping more people will be able to move to the product side. So I'm going to formulate that answer from that perspective. And then obviously like, let me know if it makes sense, right? So at the agency, I hired for very specific skill sets. Like I hired a React engineer because I'm like, you needed to know React and you needed to be the best React engineer. And then you'd get support from design. It didn't matter if you weren't good at design. Sales, it didn't matter if you're good at marketing or not. At AirMason, what I ended up doing is like looking for like, I think it's like 4 or 5 things that we look for that made them like an all-rounded player. And then fully trusting them with everything and training them to not rely on me for decision making or anyone else for executing on anything. You know, when you're in a large company, I think you're like, am I doing this right? I need feedback from my manager. I need to make sure I'm on the right track. All very useful stuff. Absolutely super important. When you're early stage in a startup, especially one that's bootstrapped, we tell them right off the gate, like you're not going to get that support from your manager as you think you will. That typical organization. The good part is you'll get to play around and it's okay to f up. It's okay to mess up as much as you want, but you got to be your own manager and you got to play around yourself. You can make your decision yourself and it's okay if you make the wrong decisions and you can make big decisions yourself, right? And it's okay to mess up on all of them. And I'll purposely bring out examples of places where I failed so that they know it's okay to fail at it and then how to recover from it. So how to mitigate those failure points.
Yeah, but you separated them, right? Like when you hire people for AirMason, that was just for AirMason. Like people were not at the agency and then also working on AirMason.
So the only person was Kai, like our creative director. So he was the one, like it was such an expensive resource where like, I hate using the word resource, but like such an expensive like team member hire to make that we couldn't afford him at AirMason. So anything that we couldn't afford from AirMason, we would try to borrow from the agency side. But the moment we were able to hire someone, we would make sure that they were dedicated to AirMason. And that was a big part. That was a big difference between all the other projects that failed and this one that didn't, is making sure that they had the mind space to know that this was the only thing that they were responsible for. And then once we did that, I realized just like where someone's mind is allocated is far more important than the hours that you give them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also want to say that Kai, your creative director, is a very valuable resource because he actually was the mastermind behind our branding. So the eWebinar branding, all the colors, all of that, every single page of the version 1 app, every single page of the version 1 website was also him. And we get compliments on that all the time. So I can see why that's the person that you'd want to split to the other side. So I know you eventually recently completely moved off the agency. Did you at some point stop selling services altogether to focus your time and resource to build AirMason? Like, what was that actual transition like?
Yeah. So this answer has changed in the last 6 months. So first we stopped selling to new clients completely. We're like, nope.
Like you just say no.
Yeah, we just said no. Like, we don't have availability. Thank you. And I also removed myself from the Serind process. So then project manager, and then they were just focused on doing it. And we had all these other clients that we've worked with over the last 9 years, and they kept needing stuff and they would keep messaging. And I'm like, nope, happy to refer you to someone. And they're like, great, refer us to someone. And I'm like, agencies suck, don't hire them. They're like, yeah, that doesn't solve our problem. I'm like, okay, got to figure out how to do this. We're like, okay, well, yeah, but we're going to charge you like a ridiculously hourly rate. They're like, done. And I'm like, no, you're supposed to say no to that. So then as we kept raising our prices and like clients are still following. And then I'm like, okay, well, we're not going to do fixed fee project. And they're like, okay, fine. I'm like, oh, man. And then I'm like, okay, well, you're going to pay us every month and you're going to pay us like a last month deposit. And then like, we can cancel anytime we want. And they're like, okay, fine. And I'm like, oh. So now over the last 6 months, we've got clients again at Serind and it's growing again. But now it's growing where like there's no fixed fee projects. It's extremely high hourly rates. And it's geared towards founders who will just trust us and just be like, yo, just do your thing. Yeah, if you get it wrong, we'll fix it later. And it's still not something that I'm actively involved in. And so now I'm the guy like looking through the window. I'm like, oh, that's what you guys are doing there, you know? But I believe that was ultimately the right move because I don't believe, even with all of those things, Serind, it's always going to be a boutique shop like this. It's never going to be a scaled up powerhouse of a company.
So when you were saying no to clients, was the mindset there, you're just going to finish working with that set of clients and then just shut it down and then move everybody over to AirMason? Like, was the AirMason revenue enough to cover that team?
Yeah. So I tried to transition Serind people onto AirMason. So we had a turning point where like AirMason revenue covered AirMason staff. And then AirMason revenue can potentially cover all of Serind's staff. So then I tried to bring Serind into AirMason. But what I realized is that, again, the culture is a product. And like if someone's trained on the wrong product, that's apples to oranges and they weren't fitting into AirMason. So then it was just like you either go back to Serind where you're happy there, or you do your own thing, or you find another company and we part ways because there wasn't a compatibility. So for AirMason, we try to keep it to new employees that were just suited better to the AirMason mission.
So why did you completely move off the agency? It was still running, right?
Yeah.
Like, why were you like, okay, I'm not doing this anymore?
For me, it was kind of like, there's two parts. There's personal and then there's business reasons to it. So the personal reason was like, I just felt like a surrogate, you know, you help sort of deliver a baby and then you're like, all right, great. I don't get to even keep you a little bit. Like, okay. And, you know, and the inherent thing with agencies is that on the business side now, it's like feeding that beast that I mentioned, right? So the more revenue you generate, the more you have to scale up. And the type of agency that we were, and so you can be a profitable agency, but the way to be profitable is to be extremely ruthless. And then the moment there's no work for someone and you know there's not going to be enough work for this person for like the next 2 months, they're like out of there, cut them out, repeat hire again after 2 months. So like high turnover, but like focus on profitability. You can run the shot that way. Great. We weren't that business. So we would pay an employee 3 to 4 months and like have them work on a side project, because we didn't have work for them, but it didn't make sense to like let them go, you know, because they were starting a family and all of that stuff. So it just didn't suit my values in terms of making it profitable.
Yeah. So I guess the mindset was, okay, finally, AirMason is profitable. You can cover a lot of people. You're intending to kind of shut it down, but then people kept coming back. And then instead of shutting down, you're like, I'll just raise prices, which is actually very similar to what you did for AirMason. Is like, I'm just going to raise prices. And instead of them going away, you kind of redefined what Serind is now, which is in a more manageable spot such that you can also run the product business. It's kind of interesting how that works. So looking back, what were the things you got really right that you think others can emulate?
So these were sort of the things that come to mind, like reflecting back on what the things that I think helped properly. So one was on the agency side, making sure, first of all, the processes there were strong so that I wasn't the bottleneck for pretty much anything in the company. Like if I went away to Thailand for a month, which I do, as you know, the company will do better. It usually does better without me there, So like the best leader is like invisible. So making sure that happens. And then that frees up your time. And then while I was building like a product-based business with previous side hustles, even with Serind, like for example, if I wanted to do bookkeeping and I didn't have money to hire a bookkeeper, I would try to do it on my own. I'm like, okay, let's just do this on my own. I don't know how to do it, but I'm going to figure it out. That's what founders do, right? That's what you're supposed to learn, whatever you don't know. That's the thing. And I'm like, no, that's wrong. That's because when I learn slowly and I make terrible mistakes. I think that came from the blog post written for all the Stanford and Harvard grads. For me, there should be a different blog post. And the different blog post would probably say something like, get an expert, pay them a shit ton of money for only an hour or two, just to make sure you're doing the right things. And then get help from an expert, even though it's expensive, even though you think you can't afford it. Work with them side by side to get it right. Don't try to do it yourself. So that was the second thing. Having someone like feel complete ownership and making sure I communicated that very clearly with them. So while I would tell them like, yes, you're allowed to make mistakes and make whatever mistakes, I tell them like, you own this. Like, do you feel comfortable owning this? And if the answer remotely in the interview process was like, yeah, but I'll have help on that, right? And I'm like, no, okay, this person's the wrong person. Like, they're a great human being. They're going to do well in a corporate environment. But in a startup, I needed someone to be like, I don't care what it is. Even if I can't do it myself, I'm going to find the right people myself and make it work. So like, making sure that there was someone else on the other side who was doing that. And then also knowing that I wasn't going to be the owner of AirMason in a CEO sense and not to try to be. And what I mean by that is working like on the business and not in the business. When I say I don't see myself as a CEO, like I didn't want to be involved in the day-to-day. And maybe that's a COO or whatever it is, but when it's a small company, that's typically the CEO. And I'm like, I didn't want to do that. I really took that to heart. And I'm like, nope, I'm only going to work from like, maybe not even the general manager's perspective, but the owner of that league's perspective. And then like, let's hire those general managers. Let's figure out how to do things. Even if someone's going to fail, let them fail. Put the guardrails for them and then let them go through the failure so that they learn from that. So like creating that soft falls for team members so that they can improve upon it, but never getting in there to try and, salvage the situation yourself. And then finally, the last one was manage by coaching instead of managing by reviews and reviews of processes and like getting involved in the fixing of processes on a day-to-day basis. So if something was broken, let's say even if a process was broken, I would try to talk to that person and spend whatever hours, maybe even spend like 2-3 hours with that person, try to understand all the nuances of that thing, but letting the answer come from them, making sure that you're just arming them with the tool set. And then even if that make the wrong decisions, but making sure the decisions and the process creation came from them, but you're simply giving them all the knowledge transfer.
Yeah, I mean, it just sounds like a theme here, right? Like you're just trying to make accountability kind of the core to the person that you hire. Yes. And once you have those people and everybody, it's almost like building your startup with a bunch of mini co-founders in their own, like in their own line of business. So what were some of the things that you feel like you messed up on that you should have done differently?
Hire the wrong people. That was like the most obvious one. Like I would talk to someone in an interview. I'm like, this guy's smart or this girl's smart. I'm like, oh my God, like hire them. Yes, please. I would find like something so interesting about that person, like on how smart they were. And I'm like, bring them in. And I realized I'm actually really bad at initial judgment decisions. So I know that. And like, I feel like a lot of people want to be good at initial judgment and believe they are, but they really aren't. And I wanted to just be honest with myself about that. So what I would do is change our hiring process so that there was at least two people making the hiring decision, and they were making it separately from separate interviews. They were not allowed to compare notes. This is all like regurgitating. It's from a book called Who? Best book on hiring ever. Yeah, I did all of that wrong. And after I read the book, and then after I read it like the third time, I started getting it right.
And if you could go back in time, day one of AirMason, knowing everything that you know right now, how would you have done this differently?
I'm going to say the hiring thing, like making sure the hiring was done differently, making sure our organization was proper from day one. Like that's honestly my biggest weakness is like if nothing is ever organized. Like we had like money going from Serind to AirMason and from and then to make payroll work. Like I sold my Dogecoin and put money from there, and like there's a transfer from Coinbase. So now we have PE firms looking at it, or like we've got like we want to hire as our CFO looking at it, and it's just like, what the did you guys do to keep this company afloat? And so I wish I paid just a little bit better organized. I don't mind making the maneuvers that I made. I just wish I documented it better.
Yeah. I mean, that is so important when it comes to selling the company. There are two things we always, like in my 3 companies that I have always invested in, is really good lawyers.
Mm-hmm.
We always hired lawyers that were like above our weight so that we could grow into them. And we always had good bookkeepers and accountants to make sure everything is documented from day one. That will come and bite you if you do not document this, especially when you want to sell. Like every single thing matters.
Yeah. And sorry, can we just do another like just plug for DLA Piper? Because I know you referred them to me. They're amazing. And they're helping fix up all my ups right now. Because all of that, you're right, it's so painful. And it's not that I'm trying to sell the company, but I want to at least be in a position where like, I'm like, if we do, scale up, because now it's just like, I can see it honestly going to $1 billion. And then it sounds very arrogant to say that, but I really do see that going there. Like it needs to be well structured, and they're so good at that. And yeah, so I think you're great at hiring. I'm bad at hiring. And like, so the one thing that I've learned is ask Melissa who you should hire for your accountant, who you should hire for legal.
Yeah. DLA Piper, Michael Reed's team. I've been with them for over 10 years. Definitely shameless plug there for them. So we're nearing the end of this, but I want to ask you, what is the best advice or framework that you have for founders who are looking to transition from a service business to a product business?
I'd say focus on one of those products at any given time. Make sure that you really dedicate at least one team member to completely focus on that, completely own it. Don't try to use your idle resources, as tempting as it is, to use your idle resources from the agency side to slowly work on it. One person who's like inexperienced, not as senior, but if they have full time and mind focus on it, will do a much better job than those senior people who will give like 4 hours a week to it. Like we know every agency owner thinks they can revert idle time to the product, but for me, it didn't work over and over again.
Mm-hmm. So I know that was a lot of information for today. I think it's a great place to wrap this up. Tehsin, thank you so much for coming on today, share your valuable experience. What are some final words of wisdom that you want to leave our listeners with today, who are bootstrap founders focusing on driving growth and profitability?
I think if you aren't very frugal by nature, starting a company with funding is actually a handicap, not an advantage. If you're very frugal, then don't worry about it. Use all the money you got, use the budget, go out there. If it's innate in you, if you're a Gujarati Indian, whatever, like if you're super cheap. I didn't inherit that. I can say that, right? Because I'm Gujarati Indian, but I didn't inherit that frugal bloodline. Yeah. So if you aren't frugal by nature, starting a company with funding is not an advantage. It's a handicap. Be careful of that. Let's see. I think most companies, I think Buffett or Munger might have said this better, but it's also still funny to see how real it is in real life. Most founders that we've worked with, and we've worked with 100 of them, is they die from like too many opportunities, from pursuing too many opportunities, not from the lack of opportunities. So like that one opportunity. And then finally, and this one, like I take it to heart because like I think like so many founders get this wrong. It's such a terrible idea to discuss your ideas with friends and family, because your friends and family, above all else, like they care about your well-being, right? They care about your safety. They want to make sure you're okay. They're there to protect you from failure. They're always going to try and protect you from failure. Your dreams and goals are on the opposing side of that. So between your, to protect you from failure and like your dreams, their thoughts, their advice, all of that is going to be biased towards protecting you. So only share them with people who have taken that leap of faith already, people who have been brave enough to risk failure, and then go out there and like nurture that idea, because it's very fragile at the beginning and it needs support from other people who are risk takers.
I mean, I love that. I always tell people like your friends are going to say it's great. It's easy to say it's great. You're avoiding a conversation, a debate, right?
Yeah.
If you want to validate your idea, get someone to pay for it. And they will tell you everything that is wrong and all the things that you don't have and why they won't pay for it. So with that, if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe to ProfitLed and be notified of new episodes. Head over to our website, profitled.fm, to see the show notes of this episode. Tehsin, how can people connect with you and learn more about AirMason?
Yeah. I'm not really active on Twitter, so it's like just Instagram, Tehsin, Tehsin. Message me or email me. Bots don't pick up podcasts, do they? It's Tehsin@airmason.com. Just like whatever you need help with. If you're an agency person and you're trying to get to a product-based business, or you're just trying to start a product-based business, happy to help in any way, shape, and form, obviously. Yeah.
And of course, visit airmason.com if you want to learn more about AirMason, their customers, and the value props. Cool. Well, thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks, Melissa. Always fun chatting with you.
Thanks for listening to ProfitLed. If you enjoyed this episode, we hope you will subscribe to the ProfitLed podcast and head over to our website, profitled.fm, to see the show notes of every episode. You can also join our mailing list to be notified of new episodes or when we have interesting products and resources to share. We promise to only share things you'll actually care about. Thanks again for listening. Bye now.